Morning, Pastor Tim.
Morning. Okay. I want to just remind us this is the common figure that we all know and love now. But each assignment, you know, is basically capturing one or more of these steps in the exegetical process that we've been going through. And so each assignment, just wanted to remind us that each assignment is just simply going through these steps in the process. Okay, and so the first assignment really covered the first 3 steps, and that's focus was on the book as a whole. The second assignment and the third assignment both had to do with poetic analysis. The second assignment was looking at parallelism, the parallelism in your poem, and then the third assignment was looking at the imagery and the poetic devices in your poem. Now the fourth assignment, which is what we're going to cover this week, goes through the next 3 steps: the diagram, textual observation, and significant words. And so each assignment is simply just going through one or more of the steps in this process as we move towards the sermon. All right. And so with that in mind, let's open up let me open up the example to the third step of the fourth assignment of the process, and it steps basically 5, 6, and 7. Okay. All right, and so this is the document I sent you last week with the example, and in it, as I noted there's several places I give you to refer to just to do a review if you need to review the process. Of course, the teacher's manual that I mentioned, that's on the syllabus, you can download there. If you don't already have it, you should have it by now. And then also I give you the workshop sessions that you can consult for this. And so I'm trying to do that on each example. I should have an example, assignment number 5, the example I should have ready for you later today, and I'll post that. And so just to give you a second example of the format that I want you to follow in going through the steps of the process. So for this particular assignment, the first part of it is to complete the structural diagram for your poem. All right, for your passage that was assigned, and we reviewed that in the module in sessions 8 and 9. And the basic steps, if you'll recall, is just to identify that main clause, the subject and verb, and then look for the other phrases and clauses by identifying what I call the connector words: conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns, and participles, which, by the way, I'm covering in more detail in the other group. So if you want more details on conjunctions, prepositions, if you want to improve your grammar, you can go on my YouTube channel and go over to the graduates playlist. I don't know if you guys have looked on my YouTube channel, but I have different playlists. I have one for each group that I'm doing the workshop for. And if you go to the graduate one, I'm spending a lot more time on this step here. So if you want to work at some grammar, because I know everybody loves English grammar, right? Yeah, see, you're so excited. I can tell. It's your favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? I know that you do is you sit down with a grammar book and your box of Kleenex for the nosebleed, and you're all ready for English grammar. So,
Pastor Tim,
yeah.
me, Pastor Tim. You have your YouTube and your epistle teaching, or it's the same as Sam? With the other group?
The other group, I'm doing the graduate group, is also doing poetry. But that group is guys that have already completed the preaching program. So I'm doing a more advanced grammar with them. So I'm spending more time. The Cagayan de Oro group, I'm doing narrative with them.
You put in the YouTube also, Pastor Tim?
That's on YouTube, yeah.
Okay.
And then
Thank
I'm
you.
actually yeah, and I'm doing a new group from Malaysia. So you can go on there, you can look around, but I have a playlist for you guys. That's all your recordings, and then a playlist for the group I'm doing with the graduates of the program, and then a playlist for the group from Cagayan de Oro. They're behind you by one module. And then I also have a group from Malaysia that I'm starting the program with there. And so I'll be doing some additional things with them. So you're welcome to check those out if you want. Okay, but we reviewed this a little bit in class in a few sessions. So the first step, which is actually step 5 in the process, but the first part of this assignment is to do the structural diagram just for your poem. And then as you're doing that diagram, you're identifying the main sentence, you identify the phrases and clauses, and then you have to figure out how they modify each other and show that visually. Okay, and then the second step in this assignment is to then take that diagram and make textual observations. And for that, I just have you look for these specific elements in the poem. I reduced the list from the epistle. Okay, so you don't have to do as many different types of observations. You just need to look for at the verbs, the pronouns, conjunctions, any conditional clauses, any purpose result statements. Okay, so I've reduced it quite a bit compared to what you did for the epistles. And then third and lastly, on this assignment, this fourth assignment, is to do a word study on at least 5 significant words in your poem. Okay, and do that following this procedure. Look up the Strong's number. You can use Bible Hub or Blue Letter Bible. And you do that by going to the interlinear. And then how's the word translated in the other English translations? And then identify how the word's used in other passages. Use at least 10 just to see how has that word used in other texts. And then summarize the meaning in your own words. Okay. So we'll look at the example from Psalm 99, but that's the overview. So again, this is assignment 4, and it covers steps 5, 6, and 7 in the exegetical process, that funnel I showed you, all right? Okay, so let's go and look at how this applies to the psalm and the example from the psalm, all right? First, the diagram, the structural diagram of the poem. And actually, let's go ahead and continue our tradition of reading the poem before we get started. Psalm 99. And we'll do New American Standard. Oops. All right, I'm going to ask Joshua, I'm going to ask if you could read verses 1 to 3, and Ruel verses 4 to 6, and William verses 7 to 9. All right, so Joshua, you can start us off.
Okay. The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he.
The strength of the Lord loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them.
He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. They kept his testimonies and the statute that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, and yet an avenger of their evil deeds. Exalt the Lord our God, and worship at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so with the structural diagram, we're simply going to take, of course, this passage and break it down, as I mentioned, using the process that I described, where we first identify the main sentence, the main subject, verb, object, and then identify each phrase and clause by looking for the connector words. Now, in poetry, this can be a little bit more of a challenge, as we talked about before, because poetry, one of the characteristics is terseness, right? Brevity, short verses. And as a result, the poets often leave out the connector words. And so for poetry, that second step of the diagram where you look for, let me go back to the description here. Okay, I'm looking at this part here. This second part where we identify the phrases and clauses by looking for these connector words. Well, like I said, the problem in Hebrew poetry is especially conjunctions are often left out. So you have to try to figure out how these verses are connected. So again, remember, the parallelism helps us to understand or identify the relationship within a verse, between the lines within a verse. The diagram helps us to see the relationship between verses, okay? Because remember, in Hebrew poetry, it is broken up by stanzas, which are similar to paragraphs in an epistle. So each stanza represents a unit of thought, okay? And so within that stanza, you're going to have relationships between the phrases and clauses there. And so, so there is a logic, there is an instructional component to the stanzas. It's just doctrine that's expressed figuratively or with passion and emotion. That's the main difference between an epistle and a poem. A poem presents doctrine instructionally, and it's just straightforward. But in a poem, that doctrine is presented in somewhat logical fashion, but also with these additional poetic elements. And so that's why diagramming can help with Hebrew poetry. It's just a little more difficult because of this lack of the connector words. All right. So what you're going to see, and if you need to, go back and look again at the sessions that we did on this, because I talked about this. But notice I have in brackets here, I'll just highlight it so it's easier to see, several times where the conjunction is not, conjunction is not in the original Hebrew. So that's why I have it in brackets, but it's implied in the poem, that connection, okay? So for example, I'm just going to highlight all of them so you can see just how often the poet does not include it. Okay, so for example, if you remember, okay, the Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. And when we talked about the parallelism in this verse between those first two lines, the idea seemed to be that the second line, let the peoples tremble, was a result of the first. Because the Lord reigns, therefore, let the peoples tremble. Because he is enthroned above the cherubim, therefore, let the earth shake. The Lord is great, he is exalted, therefore, let them praise. So again, the therefore is not in each of these verses, but because of the nature of the parallelism, where we can see there is a relationship there of a result based upon a statement, that word therefore is implied. So this is kind of like, we talked about ellipsis, where words are not included, but they are implied to be there. And again, the ellipsis is used in poetry to kind of keep it short and brief. Now one could say, well, how do you know? How do you know that these conjunctions are intended? Well, we have a great example in this poem if we compare the refrain, okay, the refrain in verse 3, verse 5, and verse 9. In our previous analysis, we noticed from the poetic devices, this use of refrain was in verse 3, where it says, let them praise your great and awesome name. And here's the refrain, for holy is he. And then in verse 5, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool, for holy is he. Again, I inserted the for. It's not there in the original. But then look at verse 9. Again, the refrain, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill. And in this case, the poet included the conjunction for. All right? So here in verse 9, he says explicitly that relationship where he says, we are to exalt the Lord our God, first command. Second command, worship at his holy hill. And then the author says, for, or because holy is the Lord our God. So he says there explicitly, he gives us that connection, that conjunction for. And so we can know that that is his intent in verse 5, because he says the same thing, exalt the Lord our God, worship, and here he says footstool rather than holy hill. And then he makes the statement, holy is he. And we know that this word for is implied because we see it in verse 9. And so that tells us that it is there in verse 5. And then we can also assume verse 3, which is similar to verses 5 and 9, because it gives that refrain, holy is he. We can also assume that same relationship. A command, in this case, let them praise your great and awesome name. And then holy is he, with the implied conjunction for, or the reason to do that. All right. Now, again, I discussed this in detail back in, I forget if it was session 9 or I think it was 8 or 9. But are there any questions on that here? You're going to see this in your poems where there's going to be a verse and then another verse, but the conjunction is left out. The connection between them is left out often. Sometimes it's there, but in Hebrew poetry, sometimes it's not. So you have to keep that in mind. And that's why we did the parallelism first, because at least within the verse, we can guess at that relationship. Between the verses, it's a little bit, that's where we do it here. Question?
Pastor Tim, more in this conjunction ba, we should, as I observe this conjunction, the parallelism is developmental.
Yeah.
Result, that's what so that we will understand, we should relate to the parallelism procedure so that we will know what's the ellipsis of the conjunction.
Yes.
Okay, more on the little bit. Okay.
Exactly. You're exactly right. That's that was so in the parallelism, we determined that the second line was a result of the first. So that's why I put in this conjunction therefore. Now in the poem, it's not there, right? It's like this. The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. Now I did not diagram it like this because I don't think he's making two separate separate and equal statements. I think he's making one statement and then stating the result, because again, we know there's parallelism going on. We know there's a relationship between those two lines. And from our analysis before, and I think session 6 or 7, where we looked at that relationship and determined that the parallelism between these first two lines is developmental result. And so in the diagram, I reflect that by putting this conjunction therefore in, because that's has the idea of a result. Okay? And it's the same in lines 3 and 4. He is enthroned above the cherubim, therefore let the earth shake. Okay? In verse 2, the author does put the conjunction in. Okay? You see that? And. So here in verse 2, he is making two parallel statements. And we know that because he does give us that conjunction and. The Lord is great in Zion. That's his first statement, declaration. And then the second one, he's exalted above all the peoples. And then I believe verse 3 has the idea of, again, this result. So because of that, let them praise your great and awesome name, for holy is he. Okay? Now, these aren't just guesses. This comes after a lot of study that's already taken place. A lot of the reading of the poem that was done, the understanding of the background of the poem and that whole study, and then looking at the parallelism within the poem, and then looking at all the figurative language. So by now, we're pretty familiar with this poem and the relationships that exist within it. And so, these aren't just guesses, but based upon our study to this point. Okay? Now, in a future step, when we consult resources, we can check with others to see if these assumed connections agree with what other scholars have come up with in regards to this poem. Okay, so we're not done. This diagram isn't the final step. Okay, we'll be refining it as we go forward. At least we should be. Okay, now notice that I separated, this is stanza 1, right? Because we'd already determined the structure of this poem, that stanza 1 is verses 1 to 3. So it is separate from, notice I have a space here between stanza 1 and stanza 2. Now notice stanza 2 is verses 4 and 5. Okay? So in stanza 2, I have there's 3 parallel statements. They're declarations. Again, that's the pattern in this poem. Declaration, then command. So we have the 3 declarations, and notice I could have done this, right? Because I believe there are 3 equivalent statements, declarations that are made. And then verse 5 is the result, all right? Because he loves justice and has established equity and has executed justice. Because of that, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Okay? And then I separate out verses 6 through 9. That is the 3rd stanza. And in this stanza, there are several declarations made. 1 declaration, 2 declarations. Notice the conjunction and. So sometimes the poet puts it in. 3rd declaration, and notice the conjunction and. 4th declaration, 5th declaration, 6th declaration, 7, seeing a pattern, 8, 9 declarations. So in verse 4, he made 3 statements, 3 declarations, and then the result. In verses 6 through 9, the 3rd stanza, he makes, what did I say, 8? Was it 8 or 9? I forget. 3, 6, 9. 9 declarations, and then the result. Okay? So what you're looking for is trying to find patterns. Okay? Within your poem. Sometimes the patterns are repetition. Sometimes the patterns are like this, declaration, then command. Sometimes the pattern is a first person pronoun, then a second person pronoun. Sometimes the pattern is one person speaking in one stanza and then another person speaking in another stanza. Sometimes the pattern is like in a lament. The first part of the poem will be the lament. The second part of the poem will be the prayer. The third part of the poem will be the resolution. Okay? So poetry has these patterns that you need to look for. And you only see them as you get more familiar with the poem and as you study Hebrew poetry in general. The more you do that, the more you'll notice certain styles and techniques, patterns that the poets use. Okay? But the structural diagram is simply intended to identify the relationships grammatically. Parallelism identifies relationships within a verse semantically. That is the meaning, the connection. Diagramming identifies the relationships within and between verses and looks at the grammar and see how these phrases and clauses connect grammatically. All right. So again, I encourage you to go back and review those sessions if you need to kind of remind yourself of the process of diagramming. Okay, because I don't want to spend the whole time going through that here. So all I'm asking for you to do in this first part of this assignment is just give the diagram. You don't have to give all of these steps. Okay, really just give the last step, the actual diagram. Okay, you're welcome to put in all the steps if you want, but all I want you to do as far as the assignment, all you need to show me is the diagram. And then I'll send you mine so you can compare. And I'm doing that not because I'm saying I'm certain mine is all correct, because I'm still learning too, but what it can do is I encourage you, look at the one I send you and then compare it to yours and see if you can understand what the differences are. And sometimes I may not be correct. I think most of my diagrams will be pretty accurate, but I just want you to compare to another diagram because that process helps to learn as well. Just like we saw when we went through the diagram before, you guys noticed some things that I hadn't seen when we were diagramming this particular psalm, and it was helpful to me in this when we diagram this psalm. So I will send you mine after you turn your assignment in so you can compare, and hopefully you can then refine your diagram based on that comparison. Okay? So like I said, for this part, you can just give me your diagram, and you can diagram I diagrammed this, I should have put it here. This is New American Standard Version. You can diagram in the ESV if you would like. That's perfectly fine if that's the version you're comfortable using. But I would say only do one of those two versions in English, because those are the best ones to use for this step, because those two versions are the most literal English translations. And those are the ones that most closely match the Greek, or in this case, Hebrew. Now, first, are there any general questions about this step? And then I'll answer any specific ones you might have about your particular passage. But first, any general questions on diagramming or anything that's come up in my review of this that you have a question or a comment about? Everybody's a diagramming expert now?
Pastor
Not
Ted.
yet.
Not yet.
Pastor Ted.
Yes, sir.
With my text, Pastor Ted, in Psalm 119, can it be interchangeable, the pattern here? Because what I'd like to do is, like in my first verse 25 in Psalm 119, I would like to do this like this: revive me according to your word, and then because my soul cleaves to the dust.
Yeah, hold on.
I do that?
Yeah, I'm going to set up a blank sheet here. So I can do, oops, which file was this? Okay, forget that. Yeah, give me 1 moment. I'm going to pull up, let's see. Let's try this one. Okay, let's see if I have the, all right, that's good enough. I'll go here. Okay, and then, oops. Almost. Okay, now I'm set. And then your passage was
25 to 32.
Psalm 119. Okay. All right. Let's increase it to that. All right. Sorry for the delay there. Okay, which verse were you looking at?
Just like the, let's take verse 25.
Okay. So my soul cleaves to the dust. And then you're asking about the second line?
Yeah. Revive me according to your word. I want to highlight the revive me according to your word and make and let the first line modify the second.
Yeah, that's what you determined from your parallelism, right? You said that was developmental, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that the second line was, how did you see it?
Yeah. I want to do like this. Revive me according to your word, because it said therefore. Because I can highlight my situation here in the verse in the first line, so that the second line would modify the first. But I want to highlight the revive me according to your word, that so that the first line would modify it.
Yes.
Revive me according to your word, because my soul cleaves to the dust.
Yes. Well,
just like that.
Hold on.
Can I do that?
You mean, Brother Rex, you will invert the line number 2 to line number 1?
Yeah. Yeah. Let line number 1 modifies line number 2, not the way it is. It is written here.
My soul cleaves to the dust, so that's a statement. And so in response to that, he says basically,
therefore, yeah.
Right? The prayer, prayer is based upon this statement, right?
This question.
Yeah. So this is how I would do that. My soul cleaves to the dust, and I would, you could put therefore in parentheses, because that's the implied relationship based, and this is based upon parallelism analysis, right? You see this relationship. So yeah, I would, because I don't think these are two independent statements. He's not just saying, my soul cleaves to the dust and revive me according to your word, right? He's not making two equal declarations. There's a relationship between them, right? That's what you've, and that relationship, I believe, is like this.
It's supposed to be like that because according to the how it is written, it is like that. But I want to highlight the second line.
Yeah.
Because I want to highlight the word and make the first line as the modifier of the second line.
Yeah, this is.
It would be like this. It will be in my hopefully. It will be like this. Revive me according to your word, because my soul cleaves to the dust. Can I do that, Pastor Ted?
Yeah, I think the prayer is based upon his condition. So I would reflect it this way. This is his first statement. He's declaring his condition, right? This is where I'm at. My soul cleaves to the dust. Therefore, or here's my request, God, because my soul cleaves to the dust, revive me according to your word. And we would represent that with the word therefore here. That's what that.
Can I?
And then.
Can I give an?
Yeah, one more thing, and then go ahead, Kenneth. According to your word, that's another. According to is a preposition, so that's a connector word. So according to your word describes how to revive me.
To revive.
Okay, so that's why I put it under revive, because that's answering the question how. How could God revive me? According to your word. Kenneth, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think Pastor Rex, I think it doesn't matter, Pastor, if you retain the structure that way as it is originally written. Maybe you can do that. I mean, you emphasize the second line as you explain it. The structure does not really matter. If you want to emphasize the second, I think we can do that.
I can do that, but the way I think about this, the whole text that I am assigned to, he was really referring to the word, how it affects him. And so basically my point is I want to highlight the word of God and the statutes and the commandments of God to be the subject of the whole thing.
Yeah,
so I want to put it on the left side, most left side.
Well, but they're in response to
like
something. Yeah, I don't think.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Because the Pastor Ted, the way it is written here, it really has that impression of the answer to the situation, to the state or the situation he was into. But I don't know, but I just want to highlight those statements that has the word and the law, the statutes, commandments in it to be the subject for me. Can I do that here?
Well,
and not the situation of the person. I want to make the situation or the circumstances of the psalmist here as the result of the word of God to him.
Pastor Tim, Dr. Tim, can I butt in?
Yeah, sure.
Verse 25, as you have said, that we interpret every verses in the poetry according to deductive process, right? Deductive process. So this is my understanding that deductive process based on the reasons. Okay, when based on reasons, there is a premises 1, premises 2, and then the conclusion, right?
Yeah,
So verse 25, it cannot be interchanged because if we interchange the conclusion starts at the upper, at the premise.
Yeah, the conclusion is this: revive me according to your word.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we can't
Okay.
change. He makes the statement of his condition first, and then the
Okay.
answer is the second part: revive me. So when you preach it, certainly you can emphasize that. The solution is revive me how? According to your word. In the second verse, teach me your statutes. In the third verse, I'll meditate on your wonders. The fourth verse, strengthen me according to your word. Grant me your law. So we see that repetition of dependence upon the word, right? And that's what you're
Yeah.
seeing here, right?
I'm trying.
But,
Yeah.
but what it is that's the response, or that's in response to his condition, his situation. What's the answer to his discouragement? What's the answer to his depression? What's the answer to his dependence on God? It's the word.
Or Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
can I
Okay.
also interrupt? Or could it be, Pastor Rex, that your concern also is because we're told from the epistles that the leftmost part is the main point of the passage, or that line or that stanza, and,
Yeah,
and
correct.
because of that you're thinking that
I want to
that's
highlight
what
the main point, or the main topic, or the main subject of the
yeah.
verses here. So that's why I want the word, that the lines that has the word of like statutes, precepts, and quite to be in the left.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah,
would
and
be
that's
on the
not
right.
how it works as far as the diagram. It's
Yeah.
this
Okay.
first sentence. But let me give you another example of this. Go ahead, Kenneth. You had a.
Yeah.
Did you say something?
I'm good, Pastor Tim.
Okay. Ephesians 2. But God, because of your, how does it go? Because of your mercy. Oh, it's being rich. That's right. Being rich in mercy because of your great love with which you loved us, even when we were dead in our transgressions, made us alive together with Christ. By grace, saved. Okay, this is verses 4 and 5. This is how I would diagram this, and I hope you see the example. Let me diagram it out, then I'll explain what I think this illustrates. Okay. Okay, so the main sentence is this. Now, when we talk about this passage, so the main sentence is God made us alive. It's a declaration of God's work in our salvation. All of these other phrases and clauses are modifiers. And in this passage, Paul repeats this statement twice: by grace you've been saved. He says it again in verse 8, for by grace you've been saved through faith, that not of yourselves. So even though the main statement is God made us alive, certainly a key theme in this passage is God's grace, right?
Right.
Preach the sermon, in fact, you might even title it The Grace of God. Not because that's the main subject verb object, but because that is a key theme that Paul emphasizes within the sentence. So certainly God made us alive is the independent standalone thought. However, it's by God's grace that Paul keeps emphasizing within this passage. So it would not be wrong to, preach a sermon on the grace of God from this text, even though the main sentence is God made us alive.
Okay.
So in the same way, you see this repeated,
Yeah, okay.
I'll use a different color, right? This repeated request, and at times declaration or statement,
are just modifiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. I got you, Pastor Ted.
Okay, so all I'm saying is it's fine to emphasize that point because he keeps bringing it up in different ways. But the diagram, that he first tells us his condition in verse 25. Mm-hmm. And then based upon his situation, he says, therefore, God, my request is that you revive me. I have told of my ways. So he's saying, God, I've told you my situation, and you have answered me. Yeah. Therefore, teach me your statutes. Again, a request. Lord, I told you my circumstance. I know you hear me, so please teach me your... Okay? So that's kind of how I see that. Now, sometimes, like in verse 29, notice he makes... In verse 29, he gives two requests. All right? Mm-hmm. So that word and connects them both. It's not a... And in fact, we see that again in verse 30. I've chosen the faithful way. I've placed a command. I cling to your testimonies. So we see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 declarations and then a request. So... Yeah, I would not have an issue with if you're emphasizing the request in your sermon and the importance of the Word of God, that's perfectly acceptable because of his repetition on this. But in the diagram, you don't just say, okay, it's revive me according to your word, and then you indent my soul. That's not, grammatically, that's not what's happening here. Okay.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, Pastor Tim, thank you.
Okay. Does that make sense, everybody else?
So, Pastor Tim, we cannot invert the line 1 to line 2?
No. Unless, I mean, now it depends on the grammar. I mean, sometimes you may have something like, after I cried out to God, he answered me. Now, in this case, he answered me is the main statement because after is a preposition, or in this case, a conjunction indicating when. When did he answer me? After I cried out to God. So in this case, the first line actually is indented because of that word after. It's telling us there's a relationship, and that relationship is this first line depends upon the second line because of the word after. Now, we don't have that in verse 25. He just makes the statement. Now, if he had said this, because my soul cleaves to the dust, revive me according to your word, then it would be different. Then it would be like this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, and
that word because there might be an ellipsis.
Yeah, I don't think so. He would have included that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't typically
just like the therefore, because we can choose where to put the ellipsis there.
Yeah.
You can choose because or therefore.
Yeah,
But
because
I got you, Pastor Tim, because it's easy to do this way, your way, like this.
yeah,
Then my way with because. Now I see the
yeah.
point here because it's easier to put
Essentially,
therefore
yeah,
than because.
we're
Especially when you put the diagram, how to put the diagram in.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think with Hebrew poetry, usually the second line, it comes in response to the
As the
first.
ellipsis.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Okay.
So, Pastor Tim, so this is a rule that in Hebrew poetry, there's no interchange.
There is, like, for example, the up here, this example I just gave you, we do see that the first line is dependent on the second line. Okay, so that does happen, but usually there's a clue, such as that conjunction there, or some word at the beginning, which gives a clue that it's inverted, so to speak.
So Pastor Tim, if we are to consider ellipses, it's it's frequently in the second verse, in the second line, not on the first line.
More,
especially the first word.
More typically, yeah. And like I
Yeah,
said,
okay.
if you noticed,
Because
go ahead.
yeah, because as the text that you have considered here, after I cried out to God, He answered me. If the word after was not put in there, can it be read like I cried out to God, therefore He answered me?
Well, not necessarily. Yeah. I think here it'd probably be more like this. We wouldn't know for sure because it's not there. So this is interpretive. If I have the word after, then I know.
Definite.
It's definite. But if it's just this, I'd need the rest of the poem to help me out.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Now.
Good.
Okay, and for you have this pattern in your poem where you have a statement at the beginning, and then you have this prayer or request in the second line, typically. But they're either he's making a declaration or he's making a request. Those are the only two types of statements that we see in this particular poem. And so usually prayer, especially, Psalm 119, it's a wisdom psalm, but it has elements of a lament, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a lament, that's the typical pattern. There's this declaration of their situation, and then a prayer. And so prayer is always in response to something, right?
Yes.
So this prayer, revive me according to your word, it's a response. It's a response to my soul cleaves to the dust. And so that's why I think this, therefore, that's the relationship going on here. All right, because that's just a pattern we see in the Psalms, especially when we see laments. And even in praises, usually there's a declaration of something God has done, and then a statement of praise. That we see that as well. So this is where grammatically, sure, you could probably go the other direction here and say, you could say, well, maybe it's this. Okay, certainly that's a possibility, but and when you preach, I mean, that's the relationship, that this prayer is based upon what he says here, but this I think, again, in this particular case, we don't have that first word, so I don't think we can assume that. And secondly, as I said, there's a pattern in the Psalms where prayer or praise is often given in a response to something that is said or declaration that is made. And so I think that's the appropriate. Now, when you preach this, though, it's going to, essentially you're going to be saying, why is he asking to be revived? Because his condition.
Mm-hmm.
So it won't have a big effect on how you proclaim it, because it's the same point. When we are discouraged, what should we do? We should seek to be revived according to God's word and not look for that in something else, right? Don't look for revival from people or from food or alcohol or sex or any of that, right? Look for revival, refreshment from the word of God, right? That would be the application, I would see, right? Okay, that's a great question.
Pastor Rex really likes the hard way.
Yeah, I just want to finish my assignment, brother.
Okay. Any other questions you guys have on your particular passage, or anyone else?
Yeah, if you want to finish your assignments, please ask Pastor Tim right now.
Yeah, this is your chance.
Pastor Tim,
I'm almost done with my assignment.
I'm confused with one verse of my psalm.
Okay, tell me your psalm again.
My psalm is Psalm 100 and then verse 3.
There you go.
I've initially diagrammed it, but I'm somewhat unsure. And yeah, I'm somewhat unsure.
Okay, well,
if I did the right thing.
There you go.
Let's see. Okay, I'm just trying to get the right format here. Okay, verse 3.
Yeah, so specifically, of course, the verb there in line 1 of verse 3 is no. And then with the second line, I've aligned it is under himself is God.
Okay, so we're focused on know,
verse 3,
that the Lord himself is God.
Know that is God.
Okay, it is he.
And then so who has made us and not we ourselves.
Okay, not we ourselves.
Yes. So I'm wondering.
Okay, I see. Here we go. Yeah. Okay, so what's your question?
Basically with that, we are, that highlighted we are, I aligned it with under we ourselves because it's practically the same thing. We ourselves were created by God and we are his people and the sheep of his pasture. That same way.
So you have it as
I moved, so we are his people. I moved it under we ourselves. And then the following and the sheep of his pasture is the same. So it's exactly the same as you did, except the we are his people line, I placed it directly under we ourselves. Because we ourselves, we are his people and the sheep of his pasture. So I aligned it that way.
Oh, so Yeah, we are, yeah, so like this is people and
So I didn't cross
like
out
this.
we are. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. But I did not cross out we are. I just put it under we ourselves.
Oh, yeah, but what he's saying here is it is he, and then in parallel, it's like this, and it is not we
Oh,
who has made us.
okay.
That's what he's saying. Okay. And the reason, and I would do it this way, because
Lagi adto ma? Atay gi adto.
okay, this is how I would do that. All right. Because the implied, there's a declaration, command, know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us, and it is not we ourselves. And the implied, the ellipsis here is this, right? Who has made us, right? He leaves that out of that line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think his people and the sheep of his pasture is, the result or the reason. How do I know that we have not made us? Because we're his people and the sheep of his pasture. You see that relationship?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the we are is actually not in the Hebrew text. It's literally
His people.
his people and the sheep of his pasture. Okay, that's
So if even if I aligned it that way, even if I did not cross out the we are, that would be considered correct.
that's how I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you could.
now should I now uh, cross out the we are instead of aligning? Yeah, just like
You
what
can leave it in. It's fine. I think it's an accurate translation. I think that's the implied idea from the poet. So the English translation just puts that in because if you just put the literal statement, right, his people and the sheep of his pasture, that's a little mysterious, right? What does that mean? So I think they just added the interpretive statement of the we are, but that's what the poet is intending to, so that they're basically saying that's the ellipsis here.
Okay.
They're saying because we are would be the implied relationship.
All right, because that's where I was really unsure if I aligned it that way, and then I did not cross out the we are.
Yeah. The ESV has, it is he who made us, and we are his people and the sheep of his pasture. But
I'm referencing NASB. I'm using.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the other translations because that's what you should be doing as well in this process, just to compare, see what they. Verse 3 is he who made us, we are his people, sheep of his pasture. Okay. But yeah, this is how I would diagram the NAS. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Sure. Okay. Any other specific questions? Everyone else is okay on their text? Any other questions you have on your passage? Okay.
Silence means yes.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Silence means yes.
Okay. Or it means I have a headache. Okay, well, let's go on then to the second part of assignment number 4. After your diagram, then what you're going to do is the textual observations. Okay, so you're going to go back and just look for some specific things that I line out for you here. And what I want you to look for is, again, I mentioned it, oh, sorry, at the beginning here. Look for the following elements in the poem. So go back in the poem, and then I want you to examine each verb. And remember, the key characteristics of the verb are the tense, the mood, and the voice. Examine each pronoun, and what I mean by that is just identify the pronouns. I'll show you what that means in a minute. Any conjunctions, conditional clauses, and purpose result statements. So some of this you've already answered by your parallelism and things like that. So for this particular psalm, this is what that looks like. So I'm going to take each verb from my translation and basically parse it. I'm going to look for, again, remember, I'm looking for the tense, the mood, and the voice. Okay? And again, you can go back to our discussion. I think it's in session 10, maybe session 9, where I talked about that, right? The tense is past, present, or future, right? The mood is the indicative, which is a declaration, statement. The imperative, which is command. The interrogative,
Questions.
the question. And then we had that kind of interesting mood, the subjunctive. Okay, the subjunctive, which is introducing possibility. And then there's the conditional mood. Okay? And then finally we have voice, active or passive. So what I want you to do is examine each verb. All right? So, for example, in Psalm 99, verse 1, we have the verb reigns. That's a present tense in the English. It's active because it says the Lord reigns, so the subject's doing the action or is being described. Indicative means it's a declaration. So the Lord reigns, that's a statement. Present tense, active. Let the peoples tremble. Present tense, active, and it's imperative. Okay? By the way, in Hebrew, there are, we're normally used to seeing commands in the second person, right? You praise, you go. That's pretty common. In Hebrew, there's a way to express commands in the third person. Let him praise. Let them go. Is how we might translate it in English. It's really a command. It's commanding in the third person. So it's not as direct as saying you do this, but it's a more indirect saying let them do this. And a good example is in Hebrews chapter 10, where it says, let us draw near, let us hold fast our confession, let us not forsake gathering together. Those are all commands, and that's actually in the Greek. And they're third person commands. All right? So, let tremble is actually an imperative, and you'll see that in the original Hebrew. It's given in an imperative the way it's written is in the form of an imperative. Let tremble. So that's a present active imperative. And then we go to the next verb, his. Holy is he. Or the Lord is above the cherubim. Present tense, active indicative. Let the earth shake. Present active imperative. Okay? And so just go through and examine each verb in your passage. Okay? And that's what I do here, every verse. And what I'm doing is looking for a pattern. Because sometimes you'll see that. You'll see, like in this case, I see an indicative, and then I see an imperative. I see indicative, and then I see imperative. And you may even want to highlight going through. Okay, I'm going to look for every imperative. Okay, and then I might, after that, go back and say, okay, I'm going to look for an indicative. Sometimes coloring, highlighting these things can help. Okay, see what I'm doing? Look at all these indicatives here in a row. So remember, we talked about sort of the pattern here in this psalm is, oops. Okay. This is the first stanza. This is the second stanza. Sorry. This is the first stanza. This is the second stanza. This is the third stanza. Okay? So sometimes you can identify patterns by looking at the verbs. You can do the same thing with the tense. Present, 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 past, past, present, present, past, past. Sometimes there'll be patterns. Notice all of these in verse 6, 7, and 8 are past and active indicatives. They're all statements of what God has done. And then verse 9, a present tense imperative command to respond. In verse 4, past tense, and then present imperatives. All right, so this is just another way to look at your passage, and sometimes you might see patterns or things that that come out of that, or you might notice the tense is one way, and then you have a different tense, or sometimes again the mood of the verb. So this is what I want you to do. The verbs are key. They drive the action, so to speak. So that's why I have you analyze the verbs first. Okay? Tense, mood, and voice. So just go through and look at those. The second thing I want you to look for is pronouns. And so all I do is just list the pronouns. And again, I look for patterns. Notice verses 1 and 2, he, and then your. Verse 4, you, his, he. And then look at verse 6. His, he, his, he. And then you. Okay? So there's this describing God in the third person, and then describing him in the first person. And then notice, I also include, what does the pronoun refer to? And look at this, guys. Every pronoun in this passage refers to Yahweh. Every single one. This is an emphasis on the fact this poem is all about God. Its focus is on him. And at times the psalmist speaks in the third person. At times he speaks directly to Yahweh. All right, so that's an important thing to notice. And I note that here, pattern. All refer to Yahweh, all the pronouns do. and then it's mostly in the third person. And then conjunctions. Now here, again, as I mentioned, in poetry, a lot of times conjunctions are left out, but at least I want you to note the ones that are in the poem. And I even said here, the conjunction therefore or for is implied at the beginning of verse. Okay, so I do mention here the implied conjunctions, the ones that I think are there implicitly but not written explicitly. Conditional clauses, I didn't see any in this poem. And then purpose result, I said each imperative given is given in response to the previous statements about God. Okay, so I'm only asking you to look for in the observations 5 things: the verbs, the pronouns, look for any conjunctions, conditional clauses, and the purpose. And again, as you list these out, don't just list them, but also think about, do you see any patterns? Does anything stick out to you as you go through that? Okay? Any questions on this? Now, this may seem like, oh, go ahead. Question or comment. No? Okay. This may seem tedious, and it is kind of tedious. But remember I told you, exegesis is like you're looking at a diamond, and you examine a diamond from different points of view, right? When you see what do they call those jewelry guys, right? They have the little eyepiece, and when they examine the diamond, they rotate it around. Why are they doing that? They're trying to identify how the integrity of the diamond, and they have to rotate it and look at it from different angles and different points of view to thoroughly examine it. And that's what all of these steps in this exegetical process is. That's what they're meant to do. They're meant to force us to look at the text from different points of view, looking for different things, because you never know in this whole process, one of these steps, all of a sudden something sticks out. You get a particular insight that you might not have gotten if you just did a simple examination or just did one of these steps. What if you said, you know what, I'm just going to do a diagram. I'm not going to do any of that other stuff. Or I'm just going to do parallelism. Or I'm going to do word studies. And that's it. You'll learn something. That'll help you see something from the text, but we want to examine it thoroughly. Remember, Paul told Timothy, be diligent to show yourself approved, handling accurately the word of truth. And so this is what diligence looks like. It's to take the passage and rotate it and examine it from different perspectives, different things that you're looking for. Because often in that process, you will discover. All right? So that's what we're doing. We're just trying to give you some tools and an approach to examine the text from these different perspectives so that it will help you to identify things, see things that that are there that may not have been obvious at first. Okay? Some people can look at a passage and they see patterns right away, but others can't. But not everyone can see everything about a passage. So these steps are intentional in order to force us to examine the passage in different ways. Okay? And part of the process means it's going to be labor. When Paul said be diligent, that's a word that reflects an idea of labor, intensity, difficulty, a challenge. Okay? The Holy Spirit blesses hardworking preachers. Okay? Holy Spirit's the one that'll give us the insight, but he doesn't bless laziness. He blesses diligence. So that's why I have this step here. After you do the diagram, step back and now examine a few features of the diagram in a specific way. So look for verbs, pronouns, conjunctions, conditional clauses, purpose, result, statements. All right? Any question on that? Okay. Again, silence means no questions, right, Pastor German? Move on. Okay, last and not least is the word studies. Now, in my example, I only did one word just for an example, but you need to do at least 5 because, you know, usually I've found that it's usually 5 to 10 words is what I do in a particular passage in order to give me more insight. So I chose the word exalt in this case, and we did that. If you go back to session 10 in the workshop, I go through this in more detail, but identify the word. And again, we're looking for the word in Hebrew. So I get the Strong's number. Here's the word, room. And then I identify the different ways it's translated. Again, this I got all this from BibleHub.com. Okay. I did the interlinear and then hit the word, the Strong's number over the word, and then this stuff pops out. Okay, so I get the Strong's number. I also looked in a couple of lexicons, BDB and TWOT. I think in BibleHub.com they have, what's the name of that lexicon? Thayer's, I think it is. So I look up the Strong's number and definition. I look up, sometimes there's other definitions I can find. And then I look at how do each of the translations translate it. All right. And then I look for how's the word used in other passages. Now, if you remember those circles of context, I'm going to just look for, because I believe David may have been the author of this psalm, I'm just going to look for other psalms that David wrote where he used this same Hebrew word. And again, those verses are in the interlinear or in BibleHub.com. It lists out all the verses where the word is used. So you can just look in that list. And I looked in that list and I just picked out the Psalms that David wrote. Because again, you want to look at your word. Is that word used anywhere else in the Psalm, or is it used by the same author in other Psalms? That's where you would check first. Now, I don't look up all the uses of the word because I think there's like, well, in this case, it occurs 16 times. Sometimes you get a word that's used, 100 or 200 times. Now, you're not going to look all those up. So just look up the word. First look up, is that word used by the author in another psalm that he wrote? Okay, in this case, David had plenty of examples. And so I just looked up and I highlight where that word is used. Okay, and notice it's used in different ways. Exalted, haughty, lift, exalted, lift, lifted up. So I just take those. I think in this case, I looked at 10 or 15. Oh, out of the 23 uses by David, so I wrote a little summary. And then I listed how it's translated. And then I gave my own thoughts. Generally, when used of David, we won't go through all this. So this is my analysis. So I look at other verses where the word is used. I give a little summary of what I see from that. And then I give a summary of what I think the word means in the context of my passage. So that's what the summary is. The word exalts, a good translation. In the context of Psalm 99, it carries the idea of honor, for God is on high. We don't lift or raise God up, but we recognize him as raised up. So that's the idea.
Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
So basically, this provides guidelines, but not necessarily as is that we will do.
Not necessarily as is?
Yes, not necessarily the format. Yes, not necessarily the same format that we need to, somewhat fill in the blank depending on the words that we will look up.
Yeah, and I repeat the procedure here, William, because
yes,
just follow this procedure. Look for the Strong's number and the definition. How's the word translated in other translations? How's the word used in other passages? So, and that's basically what I did here.
Okay, sir.
So just follow this format.
Pastor Tim,
Yes.
Pastor Tim, you were saying just a while ago about looking for another psalms, especially with those psalms that are that the author of the text that we are studying to get some the verb, no, that we talk about.
Yeah, whatever
What if
word.
in Psalm 190, because we do not know the author there?
Yeah, so then I would just look for other psalms.
Just anywhere.
Yeah, look in the same genre. If you
okay.
You first look for, does the author use it somewhere else? And then you look for, okay, well, is it used in the same genre somewhere else? So you would look in the Psalms first.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in our case, because we do not have an author,
yeah.
So just any Psalms will do.
Yeah. Now I would first
you.
look in Psalm 119. Is it used anywhere else in Psalm 119? That's the first.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the second would be, is it used in the Psalm, any other Psalm? And probably your word, you'll probably get 10 uses from that. But if not, then I would look at, okay, how about other poetic passages? Like, is it used in Proverbs? Then I would look, if I still don't have at least 10 references, then I would look in the Old Testament. Is it used anywhere else in the Old Testament? That's the circles of context that we talked about. First look, does the author use it anywhere else? Then look, is it used anywhere else in the same genre? And then look to see if is it used anywhere else outside of that. So like for an epistle, if you're studying an epistle of Paul, I would first look in the epistle that you're studying. Is it used anywhere else? If not, then I look at any other epistle by Paul where the word is used. And then I would look any other epistle. And then I would look at the rest of the New Testament. Okay, so because it's most likely the same author is going to use the word similarly.
Okay.
All right.
So if we do not identify who the author is, we look within the same genre.
Yeah.
Where the same word is used.
First, you look in the same book. So I'd look at other Psalms first, and then I would look at other poetic books like Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or Job, or so. And then, if you still don't have enough references, then you'd look at the rest of the Old Testament.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Welcome. And again, do this for 5 words. Don't do it for 1. I just did 1.
Pastor Tim, what do you suggest? The words should be in the verb or just nouns or just significant words only?
Yeah, so in the session, we talked about that. You want to find keywords. So what is a keyword? Yeah, some of the verbs, like in your passage, I would say revive. Why? Because that word is used often throughout the psalm. That's a key word in your psalm. Revive. So I would definitely do a word study on revive. Then you might want to, cleave. That my soul cleaves to the dust. That's an interesting picture. What does that word cleave mean? Because he makes several comments throughout the psalm about the fact he's discouraged, he's overwhelmed, he's being attacked. So I would look up that word cleave. So I would pick, some of the key verbs. So cleave is a verb, revive is a verb, maybe strengthen. That's another request that he makes. And then if there's any word in there that you just don't understand, like I don't even know what that word means or doesn't make sense here, that would be another word I would look up. So I would look up, key verbs, meaning the ones which seem to be important command or statement in the poem. So in your case, like I said, revive, strengthen, cleave, those are helpful ones. Then I would look for repeated
descriptive words.
you know, what words are repeated, because that reflects emphasis by the author. Then I would look for words that are confusing to me. Then I would look for words that are translated differently between the translations. And then, yeah, what did you say, Kenneth?
Descriptive words.
Okay, what's an example of that? What do you mean by that?
Like, for example,
adjectives.
Adjectives.
Okay.
Like,
The
I could
Lord
not
is
think of a
good.
particular. Yeah, what is the picture of good there? Something like that.
So maybe words, ones that convey an image, or something like that, or describe a detail. Yeah, and
or could be, Pastor Tim, when also words that describe, but it could give multiple meanings, something like that.
Yeah. So ultimately, you guys can pick any word you want to study. Okay, that's your choice. We just want to be strategic about it, because we can't study every word, and it won't necessarily help to study every word. So we want to be strategic and just identify what seem to be those keywords. And so these are, in my opinion, would reflect some of the things these are the ones I look for. All right, especially the first two, key verbs and repeated words. Okay. But certainly, you know, any word that interests you, certainly you're welcome to study it. It's just, you want to be wise with your time, because word studies can take a long time, and they often don't yield a lot of information. You know, once in a while you get a lot of good information from a particular word, but like I said, I look for these two, and in your case, Rex, and you guys that have Psalm 119, you have to think about the whole psalm for this. Is there a word in your section that's used elsewhere in the psalm? A lot.
Okay.
Because that connects it to the theme of the psalm as a whole. That's why I said for your case, Rex, I definitely would do revive and strengthen, because those are used, or synonyms like it are used throughout the psalm.
And you're asking me 5 words as your tip?
Yeah, you do 5
So
words.
I only have to find.
Yeah.
I only have to look for 2. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you got 2 more, and then you're done.
Yeah.
Now, you know, there's sometimes
You can
people,
add 5.
yeah. Sometimes people will, you know, say like, well, I'm going to look up Lord, you know, or Yahweh, or God. I mean, you can do that, but that's going to be a deep, long study, okay? Because this word is used, you know, thousands of times. And
it's obvious already.
More or less, yeah. At some point, you guys should do a study on the terms used for God. But I would just be careful with that, because that can end up becoming a long study, okay? But again, like I said, you can choose any word you want. There's no rules against doing a word study on any word. It's just, you know, pick ones that seem to be a priority, or if there's a particular word you're just interested in, you know, it's like, I really wonder what that word means, like footstool in Psalm 99. That would be a word I don't know if I mentioned it at the end here. Yeah, see, I said other key words in this psalm are worship, okay, because remember, exalt and worship were key words. Remember we talked about key verbs? Well, exalt and worship, because those are repeated commands in this psalm. Holy is a repeated statement within this psalm. And then footstool is just a word that interested me. I wasn't sure what that was referring to, so I would look that up. Justice was another important repeated word. So those would be the 5 I would choose for Psalm 99. Okay.
How about Pastor Tim looking for words that you definitely will use for your sermon document?
Yeah, certainly. And revive is one of those. Okay.
Yeah.
Hint,
Okay.
hint, hint. Yeah.
Yeah, there's words that you're not going to use in your sermon document. You just have to
Well, and sometimes you don't
scratch them
know.
out.
Sometimes you're not sure. You may do a word
Yeah.
study and you're, I didn't really learn anything from that. That happens. So, and sometimes you do a word study and like, oh, okay, that really helped give me some insight. So,
Okay.
okay. Can you guys give me 1 minute? I forgot, I got to take care of something. So I'll be back in one minute and then we'll close up. We'll finish up. Okay.
Okay.
Pastor Rex, you will be adding 5 more.
No. Duha na lang ako na
Ayaw lagi
tulo.
rin yung lisuras. Ayaw na tayo.
Kabalo mo. Unsaon.
Wise
Kabalo na mo
ka,
karon.
ay.
Unsaon paghuman.
Ken,
Ako
pumunta
human
na
ako
sa
sa akong
ato,
assignment
Ken.
do.
Tayo
Kabalo
na
mo
kayo.
unsaon paghuman sa assignment. Ala pangutana. O di ang akong assignment, duha ray akong idugang na lang. Nahuman ako sa diagram. Nahuman ako karon ani. Wala ko himuon.
Si Pastor Tim ang nag-answer niyo mo tanan.
Mao gani. O mao na unsaon paghuman. Kasi yun raman ana.
Perfect
Pangutana
dad,
mo,
perfect.
Maobitaw.
O sa sunod ha.
Maobitaw kuno ugma between 11 to 2 ang mga ganahang maghimog assignment dito ta kila Pastor
Sige,
Rex.
sige.
Rex
Sige, adto
Kandingan.
mo.
Pastor Amy.
11
Sige ra kag
AM.
Unya
Sige,
dili
sige.
ka adto.
Amy, Pastor Amy, Pastor Amy. Pastor Amy.
Oh, ato ko.
Magdala ko ice cream.
Ato ko, ato ko.
Sige, adto mo ha.
Ato ko.
Pero
Ken, ato ka, Ken,
alas
Ken.
11.
Ato ko.
That's good if
Pumunta
you
na
will
daan,
add
Ken.
5
Para gamay
more.
na tagkuwang.
Alas 11. Ako, alas 11 ra ko hantod alas 2 kay gamay ra man akong himuon baya. Gamay na lang kaya.
Igo na, kay nanas Pastor Tim.
Abot mo.
1 minute is
Madugay
done.
ato nga. Madugay atong oras.
All right, I'm back.
Yes.
Edwin gave you the warning. Okay, let me just remind you guys where we're at. Assignment 4, you got the next couple of days till November 2nd to get that finished. And you guys are doing good. We've got almost everybody turning in their assignments, so that's great. So I'm really pleased with that. Next week, so tomorrow, Lord willing, I'll post an example for the next assignment, Primary Matters. We'll go over that next Friday, and then it'll be due a few days after that. And then your sermon document you'll need to put together and preach your sermon, okay? Now, I'm going to meet with Pastor AJ in a few days. So he and I are going to discuss some options as far as preaching your sermon. I've already talked about that with you guys. I'll cover the details next week on that in particular, but just giving you a heads up. Notice, basically, after you finish your primary matters, okay, that's your authors, what, why, how, your sermon concept and outline, the consulting resources. Once you're done with that, really, it's just writing out the sermon and then preaching it. And I notice I give you essentially 3 weeks to do that. Okay, a little more than 3 weeks to do that. So hopefully you'll be able to get your sermon written out and preached. And I would recommend you write it out so you can send it to me so I can give you some feedback on the sermon manuscript. Okay. So what that means, though, is I put in a Zoom meeting here for the 27th, but notice we won't be meeting in between that. And the 27th, actually, we won't technically be meeting then. I think that was going to be the 20th. because then I was going to answer any questions you might have about your sermon. Okay. And then I'll give you, another a couple weeks to get it finished. All right. Now you're welcome to, like I said, some of you mentioned you've preached already. So if you have that recorded, I'm going to also set up a link on Canvas. I'm going to add an assignment for you to give me the link to your sermon if you record it. But I'll explain more of this specifics next week after I talk with AJ about it. Okay? But for now, just focus on make sure you've got assignment 4, you're getting that done, and begin working on assignment 5 if you haven't finished that already. Okay? And we're making progress, guys. So hopefully by the end of next month, we'll have your first passage out of the way, and we'll focus our attention on the second one. Okay? Okay. Well, that's all that I have. Are there any questions about that or anything in general? Okay. No answer. Silence means no answer. No, it's no. That's the wisdom from German. Okay. Let me see. How about I'll ask Kenneth then to close us in prayer, and we'll be finished.
Okay, let's pray.